Warm air, world politics, and a night of nerve in a penalty shootout. Toronto's waking up under gray skies, while Canada's keeper steals the spotlight on the pitch. And later in the brief, the single Canada-US decision that could ripple into jobs, prices, and trade rules for years. Toronto's starting the day cool and cloudy, around 4 degrees Celsius. And if you're headed out of the city, especially toward Ottawa or parts of southern Ontario, it's the rain setup that matters. Forecasters are warning that a warm stretch, plus heavy rain on still frozen ground, can push water into low spots fast. The rain totals being discussed are in the 15 to 40 millimeter range in parts of southern Ontario, with Ottawa closer to 20 to 30. The practical advice is the boring stuff that prevents bad outcomes. Don't drive through water you can't judge, and be cautious near creeks and culverts if you're on back roads. Turning to sports, a major move with Toronto ties, and a big moment for Canada's soccer team. Late in Trade Center, Nazem Kadri was dealt to the Colorado Avalanche. The immediate question around the league is what Calgary got back, and whether the return matches Kadri's value, especially given how close the deal came to the deadline. We'll see the full verdict later, when the pieces involved start playing and the cap math becomes clearer. On the soccer side, Canada finished the SheBelieves Cup with a penalty shootout win over Argentina after a scoreless 90 minutes. Goalkeeper Sheridan was the difference, saving 2 penalties, and Canada took the shootout 3-2. Jessie Fleming scored, Janine Sanas scored, and Julia Grasso's shot squeezed under the Argentine keeper. Argentina's final attempt went over the bar. In the earlier match, the United States beat Colombia 1-0 on an 82nd-minute goal from Alyssa Thompson, and that sealed the Americans' tournament win. Canada ends up second, the same placing as last year, and the bigger Canadian takeaway is that the team did snap a rough run earlier in the tournament with a 4-1 win over Colombia after closing 2025 on a 5-game losing streak. Now, a quick reset before the main thread. The local weather risk today is about runoff and flooding in low-lying areas. The national risk this week is about leverage and who gets to use it. Here's the key point in our primary story. Canada-US trade talks are back in motion, and they're restarting at the same time as tariffs remain in place, and the next renegotiation of CUSMA is hanging over everything. Canada's Trade Minister, LeBlanc, met face-to-face in Washington with the U.S. Trade Representative, Greer. It's the first in-person meeting since negotiations were called off last October. LeBlanc didn't offer details publicly afterward, but his office described the talks as constructive and substantive. What's happening around that meeting is more concrete. The United States continues to impose tariffs on a wide set of Canadian goods: steel and aluminum, autos, softwood lumber, copper products, even kitchen cabinets, among others. Why it matters now is timing and linkage. CUSMA, the trade framework that underpins roughly a $1.3 trillion annual Canada-US trading relationship, is heading toward renegotiation. That means any push to remove tariffs is likely to get bundled into broader bargaining over the agreement itself. The risk here is that trade irritants don't stay isolated. The U.S. has leverage if it ties tariff relief to structural changes, like greater access to Canada's dairy market, or rules affecting U.S. streaming platforms and Canadian content requirements. And there are also threats in the background: the possibility of new tariffs replacing others that were recently struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court, the idea of splitting CUSMA into separate bilateral deals, or even ending it altogether, which could expose Canadian exports to wider U.S. tariffs. Why this matters locally, including in and around Toronto, is that these aren't abstract categories. Steel and aluminum touch manufacturing supply chains. Auto rules touch employment and investment decisions. Lumber and building materials show up in construction costs. Even when the tariff is paid at the border, the bill tends to travel. Midway reminder: earlier I said we'd come back to the one decision that ripples outward. This is it: whether Canada can get tariff relief without paying for it in the CUSMA rewrite, and how far the U.S. is willing to push its advantage while the agreement is on the table. There's one more layer of context worth holding on to, and it's about security independence. Separate security reporting is raising alarms about vulnerabilities that aren't strictly military. Foreign online interference risks in domestic politics, and the ways alliances can create pressure points through technology and approvals. One example being discussed in defense circles is that key interoperability systems in NATO air operations depend on U.S.-controlled components, a reminder that partnership can also mean permission. That same logic, dependence and leverage, is the through line from defense systems to trade rules. Different arenas, similar power dynamics. Now to close with what to watch next. First, on the weather. The flood risk today is localized, but conditions can change quickly if heavier downpours set up. Watch Conservation Authority updates and treat flooded roads as closed roads. Second, on trade. The next signal isn't a quote. It's whether tariffs start coming off specific categories, and whether that's framed as a standalone move or explicitly tied to CUSMA concessions. Also watch for timelines. Renegotiations create deadlines, and deadlines create pressure. And finally, on the sports note, Canada's SheBelieves Cup finish is solid, and Sheridan's shootout performance is the kind of confidence builder teams bank for later. But the bigger test will be consistency against top opponents, not just the headline moment. That's your Sunday brief. Stay steady out there, and I'll be watching the next moves in Washington closely.